So in the last lectures, we added validation. Now, as in a template-driven approach, we can now use this form status to display messages. But it works a bit differently because we access the controls differently. Let's say we want to display a message below the input here for the username, if that is incorrect. So I'll add a span with a class of help block, again that Bootstrap class, and I'll say please enter a valid username. Like this. Now in a template-driven approach, we would place username on this and say ngModel to get the reference. This doesn't work here because again, this is not set up via ngModel. This is not registered via ngModel. But it's still very easy. We can simply add ngIf, of course, because we want to determine whether to display this or not. And then we can get access to this by accessing our overall form. And here we have a get method. The get method allows us to get access to our controls easily. Here, you can either specify the control name, or I will come back to this later, the path to the control. Now for now, the path is the name because we only have one level of nesting in our form object. And here, the name is username. So this gives us access to this username control. And now valid holds whether this control is valid or not. So if it is not valid, I want to output this. And of course, again, to give the user the chance to change it, I will also check if signup form get username actually was touched. So by adding this, we should see no messages displayed. If I click in there and click out of there, we see the error. And if I enter something valid, it's gone again. So this is how easy you can get access to a control in your form with this get helper method. Now I will repeat this for the email here. So below the input here, I will simply exchange username for email. And I will do it for the overall form. Here I can simply remove this get access here and just execute valid and touched on the overall form, which of course also has these properties. So please enter valid data, might be the right message here, and up here for the email it should be please enter a valid email. So with this in place, we should see nothing right now. If I click in here and out of there, we see the message for the username as before and for the overall form, which is still there because email is invalid. But now if I enter something valid there, we don't see it. If I remove this, we see the message for the field here and for the overall form again. So now we're using the form state again. And of course, keep in mind, these CSS classes, ngTouched, ngInvalid, are still added. So you can still go to your CSS code and say I input with ngInvalid and ngTouched should still receive a border which is red, for example. So that is still possible. The classes are the same as in the template-driven approach. So now if I click in there and leave it, you see it now has a red border, which disappears as soon as the value becomes valid. So this is how you can still use the form state. Important takeaway, you access your elements differently with this get helper method to conveniently get access to them. In the last lecture, I was already mentioning that get also takes the path to an element. What did I mean with that? It's very simple. You can specify a path here because you might have a nested form. Let's say username and email should be inside a form group. We used such forms in the template-driven approach too. So here we could create a form group named user data. And now this is a new form group again. Form group is not only there to be used on the overall form, that just happens to be a form group too. But you can still have form groups in form groups. So here we could have a form group, which of course, like the outer form group for the overall form, also takes a JavaScript object. And now we can add our form controls inside of this group. So now we have a nested form. We need to reflect this in our HTML template because right now, if we have a look at our form, it will break. You see this in the console. We get an error Because correctly, it cannot find a control with the name username. Because on the overall form, there is no such control. It's nested in the user data form group. So first of all, we need to update our synchronization. And we easily do this by wrapping our form controls here in another element, like a div, for example. So the email and username would be the two controls we wrap in there to replicate the structure we have in the TypeScript object. And on this div, we place the form group name directive. So you kind of could see the schema here. Form control name to tell Angular which property in our TypeScript object representing the form relates to which input. And form group name to tell it the same for a form group. So depending on whether you have new form group or new form control here. So here the form group name is user data with a capital D. And now with this tiny addition, I don't need to change anything else. It's almost working again, but we still get this error here, or a different error, but still related to the topic, that valid cannot be read on null. Well, that makes sense because get username still fails. Because what are we trying to do here? We try to get a form control with the name username on our sign up form. We don't have that here. We have it nested in user data, but that's not the same. So we need to update get to point to the path or to contain the path to the username. And that would be userdata.username. And it's as simple as this. You structure your path separated with dots. So if you have a new object, just place a dot in between. So let's paste it everywhere where we used one of these nested controls for email as well, therefore. And if we now save this, it should update and not display any errors anymore. Instead, we should see the behavior we saw before with the messages we get if we enter invalid data, because now the form is working again, taking into account form groups, so nesting inside of our form now. And as you saw, it was really easy to reflect this in our HTML code. It's all about keeping that in sync in the end.